Welcome back to Sputnik. Almost unbelievably, in 1971, the British overseas territory of the Chagos Islands was emptied of its entire population and handed over to the US Air Force, the better for them to bomb and kill the people of Vietnam.
There was no Falkland Island-style sovereignty for the Chagosians. They were the wrong colour for a start. It was ethnic cleansing on a mass scale.
In the War on Terror, it became clear, despite the lie in Parliament to the contrary by the then Foreign Secretary David Miliband, the US base there on Diego Garcia, still British territory, was used for secret rendition flights of bewildered and blindfolded kidnappees on their way to secret prisons for unspeakable tortures.
Miliband's parting shot, a coup de grace, which killed all remaining hopes of the Chagos Islanders to return to their homes, was to declare the island as the largest marine protected area in the world, i.e. too environmentally sensitive for the human beings who once lived there to return.
Joining us now is the redoubtable campaigner for the rights of the Chagos Islanders, television personality, all-round adventurer, and the first of our guests, I think, to have his own waxwork at Madame Tussauds. He's Ben Fogle. Ben, thanks for joining us. Chagos, Diego Garcia, Chagosians. Most British people don't know what we're talking about. Why is that?
It falls under the headline, the British Indian Ocean Territories, and it's one of these awful stories that just goes over people's heads. Some people might have read about it, but for some reason it doesn't stick. And I don't know why. And I've been involved with this for many, many years. And the headline is very simple. The story is very simple. That back in the 70s, as you mentioned, the US was looking for a military base in the Indian Ocean. They discovered this small territory, used to be part of Mauritius, which was part of the British Empire, but it got annexed shortly before this deal was done. And the British government agreed to lease Diego Garcia. This is the main island. The British Indian Ocean Territories as a whole is made up of many, many islands. Diego Garcia is the largest. And a deal was given to the US for them to lease it for 50 years to build this huge military base. And the people were written out of history.
Why did the people have to be removed? There are many places with military bases, but they've still got people.
The US predicted, way ahead of what has recently been discovered, that this was going to be a very secretive place. They didn't want any human... Part of the deal was that there could be no natives, as they called them. There could be no native population there. So Whitehall went back, suddenly discovered that there were between 1,500 and 1,800 islanders, Chagosian people living there, and they decided to wipe them off the face of the earth. I don't mean kill them. They stripped them of their passports. Up until that stage, they had British citizenship, and they deported them, where they put them in refugee camps in Mauritius and the Seychelles, the two nearest island chains, and they were forgotten about until various people started campaigning. And then in 2000, the late Robin Cook agreed to return their passports. They won a High Court bid for the right to return. Their passports were returned to them, and a number came over to the UK and settled very close to Gatwick, where they landed. They settled in Crawley, and that's where they've lived ever since. But that might seem like a large number of people, 400, but they are effectively voiceless. And that's why me, a white Englishman, have spent the last 10, 15 years trying to campaign on their part, trying to bring this to the forefront of politics.
Well, thank God for you. It's nothing for the Americans to ethnically cleanse territories. That's what their state was based upon. What is remarkable to me, that in the 1970s, quite a radical decade, this wasn't seen as the gigantic scandal that it now seems, at least to me. Did it make no impact when Whitehall agreed to this?
It was all done very secretively. And you alluded to the Falkland Islands. It was just a decade later, when we were going to war to fight for the rights of those islanders. It doesn't make sense except for the colour. The fact that the Falkland Islanders are white and the people from the Chagosians have much darker skin. And that's what I can understand, that the people, perhaps in Great Britain, didn't care. I don't know exactly why there wasn't a bigger fuss made up. Interestingly, a couple of years later, it was revealed that about 800 dogs, the pets of all the islanders, had had been gassed at the time, and that was almost front page news. People were more horrified
Really?
that that the dogs had been killed. But it was symbolic of...
So the US didn't even want the
dogs.
Labradors
They
to see what they
didn't
were
even want
doing.
dogs on the islands. And what really angered me was several years ago when this marine protectorate, marine status was given to the islands, was rolled through. I was asked to back this bid by a number of environmental organisations. I am a self-confessed environmentalist. I'm a conservationist, and I was happy to do it on the understanding the islanders would still have the opportunity to return. But of course what we've since discovered is this MPA, this Marine Protectorate Area, effectively wipes out, excludes any opportunity to land.
To borrow
because they could never, you know, a lot of people have asked, well, if they did return, what could they do? How could they possibly resettle these islands? Well, fishing would be a big mainstay. And I have been fortunate enough to visit these islands. This is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it. I visited about 10 years ago. I went in pseudo-legally, but I actually got chased away by the British Navy, interestingly. They were the ones that patrolled the water.
So where did you travel from and to?
I started my journey down in the Maldives, right down in the most southern area. I found a boat and I chartered it. It took a couple of days to get there. And what really horrified me was not just visiting these islands, which are full of the derelict homes. There's still magazines, there's cups. It's like a place frozen in. It's like a ghost town. It's like a place where people have. The door has opened, they've been told, get out, and they've left everything as it was. The houses are now obviously have been encroached by the jungle, but the churches are still there, the graveyard is still there, the shops, you have a real sense of the place it once was, a thriving community where people lived very, very happily. And what's even more shocking is that there are now kind of new age travellers. I don't mean that in that sense, but there are now yachts, men and women from all across the world living there, living in these houses. So they're not supposed to be there. So I couldn't get my head around the fact that these islanders, who are a disparate group in Mauritius, Seychelles and London, Crawley now, why they're not allowed to go home, and yet these people who have the benefit of their own boats can go back to these islands. It didn't make sense. We tried to get closer to Diego Garcia, and the Royal Navy came up to us and very politely asked us to move on. But I was there for long enough to see that in my eyes, my opinion, those islands could be resettled. There's just been a feasibility study. I went to see William Hague last year to ask about this feasibility study. He got KPMG to do this report, and they have come up with, I suppose you could argue it's relatively positive. They have said that there is no legal obstacle to the islanders returning. They've estimated that for 150 islanders it would cost £11 million a year. I think that's way too high. Maybe that's my adventuring background. I think life could be done much simpler than that. They don't need a great big hospital. They need a very simple little medical facility, get volunteer doctors. I've always argued that if this Marine Protectorate area is there to stay, then let's bring back the islanders in the capacity as wardens, as protectors. Let's make them look after this area themselves. And that's the excuse for them to go back. Let's bring scientists back. They can study. So I don't see that there is anything to preclude their return. But the government, consecutively, both Labour and Conservative governments have made it, and the coalition now, have made it increasingly hard for the islanders to return. And I think, quite frankly, they wish that this would just disappear. But it's people like me, and I'm not the only one, incidentally. There are a group of us who've campaigned for many, many years, try to keep this in the headlines. And next year, it's going to go to Parliament, and it's down to MPs to decide on the fate of the Chagosians. It's our Parliament who will once and for all make that decision as to whether islanders can go back to Diego Garcia and live within sight of the airfield. I don't think the US have anything to hide now. We know what's just been going on. The CIA released it.
Ben, you mentioned in the beginning that there was a 50 years lease given to the Americans, but some 20 years left. What happens at the end of that 20 years?
Well, actually, the 50 years is up now because it was done in '64, so it's over now. But there was an extension, a possible extension of 20 years, which is actually was included in it. So that is accepted that it will go ahead, unless there are extenuating circumstances. I would personally argue that the revelations that the islands were used as a place of torture would be extenuating circumstances. The Chagosian people themselves, the Chagosian support group, based here in the UK certainly, have agreed that they will back that 20 years as long as the US agree to let them return to Diego Garcia Island itself. It would be a natural place for them to begin the re-inhabitation of the islands. There's water, there's electricity, they've got all the basic infrastructure that they could possibly need.
They've got their old houses still.
Well, there's 4,000 US military people that live there. They've got swimming pools, they've got basketball courts, they've got cafeterias. The US have lived there very, very happily for 50 years, so why can't the Chagosian people?
It's hard work, but somebody's got to do it. The revelations that you allude to there are dark and sinister. Not only that Diego Garcia may have been a staging post for these renditions, which are effectively international kidnappings, but that torture at the base may also have taken place. Can you shed any light on that?
I can't necessarily shed any light except for speak for my own opinions or thoughts on that. It's horrific. It's horrific on a basic level that these tortures happened anyway, but the fact that we have leased these islands to the Americans makes us complicit.
Yes.
Whether we discover any more details about how involved we were in these tortures, I don't know. But the bottom line is that we leased these islands, arguably in good faith, but that simply was not the case. And that's why I will carry on fighting this campaign.
Well, God bless you. I was there when David Miliband spoke. I saw his lips move when he denied that any of these rendition flights had passed through Diego Garcia. It was a bright, shining lie. Ben Fogle, thanks very much.